Welcome back to another episode of Speaking Tongues. I'm here today with Chef Alexandra Strong. Chef Alex is the executive chef for Restaurant Associates at the Mitsitam Café, located at the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian on the National Mall. The cafe offers a varied menu featuring ingredients and dishes reflecting the diversity of the indigenous communities of the Western Hemisphere. Her interest in native ingredients stems from her multicultural background with roots in the Indigenous Caribbean as well as West Africa and Europe. To develop the menu, she spent time poring over cookbooks and in conversation with Indigenous cooks to learn more about the aromatics, spices, and cooking methods with the flavors and traditions of the Western Hemisphere at their foundation. At the same time, she works to honor the evolution of native foods, inevitably arising from cross cultural exchanges. I am so happy to welcome you to the show, Chef Alex. How are you today?
I am wonderful. Thank you. How are you?
I'm fantastic. I'm really, really looking forward to this conversation that we're going to have today. And I like to kick off each episode with the same question, and that is, what is your first language and which languages have you learned to speak?
So my first language is Spanish. I am of Puerto Rican background. I was born in Puerto Rico, and at the age of 2, I moved over to the great state of the Bronx, New York. So I kind of grew up in that area. Now, other languages that I speak, I've traveled a lot with the company Restaurant Associates, so I've been to a couple of places. But one language I'm really, really interested in learning is French, and I find it so difficult to learn French, but I'm really passionate about it. So that's something that I'm working on as we speak.
Yeah, that's exciting. And I'm also working on learning French. So I hear you that it's tough. It's a doozy, but we persist. We're both Bronxites, and that's what we
Yes,
do. It's in our blood to push
yes,
forward.
to push forward.
So tell me a bit about your background, being born in Puerto Rico, coming to the Bronx. I know, and just to let our listeners know, we have a lot of Puerto Rican culture in the Bronx, and there's a lot
Yes.
of community there, vibrant, beautiful community in the Bronx. Tell me a bit about using the Spanish language, and how using it in the Bronx versus English, or maybe using the Puerto Rican vernacular Spanish in the Bronx, and what that communication was like for you.
Great question. So I was born in a town called Mayagüez, and if you look at the history and the culture of Mayagüez, it's an indigenous background. So I am Taino with that background. So growing up in the Bronx, right, and then going back to Puerto Rico as I got older, I noticed that the Spanish language was different, especially in New York,
Mm.
in the Bronx, right? I've always been called like the nickname was a New Yorican, right? Because it was so different than in Puerto Rico. And then when I would go home to Puerto Rico and I would speak Spanish, they would like give me the side eye, like, what are you talking about? We don't really
Mhm.
understand what you're saying, right? But I think that learning or understanding both cultures, because I think even as a Puerto Rican in New York or living in New York or being raised in New York, it's a different culture than the Puerto Ricans that are actually in Puerto Rico, on the island of Puerto Rico. I was blessed to understand both sides. And when it came to food and the culture, it's amazing how in Puerto Rico the traditions are almost still there. And then, in New York, we tend to take those traditions and kind of twist it up a little bit or kind of make it your own, kind of out of the box type of way. So I'm kind of glad I was able to kind of understand both sides.
Yeah. Tell me about that. What kind of influences are you seeing in Puerto Rico in terms of food and in language that you're not seeing so much of here in New York, or what things are interpreted differently here?
So when it comes to like certain ingredients, I noticed in Puerto Rico, or being raised by my grandmother and my mother, my grandmother was very traditional, right? For example, let's talk about achote, right? Achote is the coloring, that red coloring, right? And so, I can remember a time where I would, take a shortcut and buy the sazon in the pack, right? And she would just be like, no, not in this house. I'm going to teach you how to make, we didn't have that back in the day, right? This is how we made the oil to make the red rice and to season our food. So those things, as I traveled to both, or understood both sides, I can appreciate, or I appreciated the traditional ways of doing things and the meaning behind it, right?
Mm.
Because there's always meaning behind the ingredients that we use, or the food that we eat, or there's always stories that go behind that. So she'd always tell me how they would use this oil, and that's how they would like paint their face, right? They would put markings on their face with that same oil from the achote seed, and the seed comes from a plant, right? And so things like that always amazed me. And so now I don't even use the sazon. I always make my achote oil from scratch because of grandma.
I love that. And I'm ashamed to say I just bought a pack the other day. So maybe you could drop the recipe
I
a
got
little
you. I
later.
got you.
So talking about coming from Taino culture, I think this is very, very important to talk about. And I'm happy that we can touch on this. I would love to know, as we are looking at Puerto Rico and we're looking at the culture, and maybe we're not even seeing that Taino influence that is there or the Taino culture is there. So, do you feel like that is that an assumption that I'm making correctly that people really don't recognize Taino influence as much as they should? And if you could tell us, when we're talking about Taino culture and the Taino part of Puerto Ricanness, where
So
does
I
that
totally
come in?
Right. I totally agree with you. You don't see that tradition anymore unless you're like in Puerto Rico. And even in Puerto Rico is when I'm learning, as I still talk to some family members, that they're really scattered around in Puerto Rico. There are very few that keep the tradition alive. So, what I'm trying to do, or what I'm trying to make my business to do, is to really let people know that yes, we are part of an indigenous tribe, right? We tend to focus a lot on the Native Americans in the Midwest, but when you look at the history, we're all indigenous, right? We just all, the food might be prepared a little differently, or the ingredients might be a little different depending on the region that you were born in or raised in, or the region that your crops were growing in, but it's all indigenous. And so what I'm trying to do is kind of showcase that in the food here in the cafe, and let people know that hey, we do focus on the Midwest, but come over here and let me show you what we were doing over here in Mayagüez and all the camps in Puerto Rico, because it is lost, and I don't want anyone to forget it, and it's important to me. And because I am a chef, the way I can show it is through food.
Yeah. Showing it through food is so important because we are, I'm of Caribbean background as well. And even I notice as I look at different parts of the Caribbean and, am trying different cuisines from different part of the Caribbean, there's so much connection there. And then realizing that connection is there, and then it's also influenced by what's coming from Africa as well. And I just think that food is such a beautiful way of transporting and carrying and honoring our history that wasn't recorded, that we weren't allowed to record, that we didn't have the resources to record. And so I think it's such a beautiful way, with any Indigenous community as well, of showing that this is our lineage, this is our heritage. And I think it's maybe one of the most important things that, one can carry, as an Indigenous person from, a part of the world that people don't recognize as much as they should.
It's amazing that you say, a lot of the things come from Africa. To me, sometimes words can be similar yet different, right? Or the way we may use it in a sentence changes the outcome. But the connection for me is when it comes to language, right? And learning the different names of ingredients, and
Mhm.
then finding out that somehow they're connected in an ingredient or a dish. Like, so as I was kind of researching before I came to the museum here, is that, you know, in Puerto Rico, there's a national dish. Our national dish is arroz con gandules,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
And so, I was like, okay, that's a little national dish. But then, I have some Jamaican friends, right? And they also make a dish similar to, it's the rice. And I would say to my friend, like, "Oh, I'm making arroz con gandules," and then I would show her the pea, and she'd be like, "Oh, we call that gungo peas, right?" And I'm like, "No, it's gandules, right?" And she's like, "No, it's gungo peas, right?" So, but it's the same pea. So I was like, okay, we apply it a little differently. They make it more into stews, and we cook it more into our rice, but it's the same bean, and it's just called differently, right? But it was all brought over from the West Africans when they came over, right? And so that just interests me. And then I was like, well, where did the name pigeon pea come from, right? So I started
Mm.
digging into that. And that came from the fact that it was used to feed the pigeons in Barbados. I mean, come on, man.
What?
Yes, yes. So that's how in the Caribbean islands they started calling them the gungo peas, because that's the word that they derived from that. And then it came from like the archaic English name for the plant Congo pea. So, it's all a connection, and that's amazing to me,
Yeah.
right? Because it's like kind of like how us as humans, we have lineage. It's food has lineage. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It traveled, and depending on where it landed, we took it, you took it, our ancestors took it and created it how we saw fit. One other dish that I was researching, we do in Puerto Rico, we do rice pudding, right? Arroz
Mm,
con dulce. And
mm,
so as I started researching that, I saw that in the Americas or in England, they would do rice with milk,
mm.
right? Because they had milk. They were able to get milk, and they had milk. But when it came over to the islands, we didn't have milk at the time, but we had coconuts. And we had the coconut water, huh? And
Right.
so we had to use what we had, which was coconut, the water from the coconut. So now when we make that dish, it's traditionally made with coconut milk and rice, right? So you had to use what you have where you was, at the time. So it's amazing to me. Like, I'm talking about this and I'm smiling ear to ear, because there's always history and story behind it.
Yeah. I never even considered that's why the coconut milk is in the rice. And every time I never have coconut milk in my house, right? So I'm like, do I want to run out and get this? Or can I just use regular water? Like, what do I do? And now I feel like I have to honor my ancestors and just
Yeah,
run out and get the get the coconut milk.
you got to get the coconut milk. We took it, we added some sugar cane and the coconut milk and arroz con dulce. Then later on came the spices, the nutmeg and the cinnamon, right? But yeah, you gotta do it with the coconut milk now. Sorry.
So tell me, I really love that. Tell me about some flavors that you've encountered in your culinary journey or in your travels that you've kind of noticed were similar to what you were trained in or what you were used to. And maybe some connections. Well, you talked a bit about that, but are there any other connections that you've noticed that were similar in that way, maybe with spices or with preparation or things like that?
Absolutely. So I in my time in DC, I worked at a place called the World Bank. And if you know anything about the World Bank, people think it's like a bank where you go borrow money, but it's not that type of World Bank. It's actually a financial institution that helps give aid to other countries around the world. And so with that being said, there's a lot of international people that come through there for business reasons, meetings, things like that. My culinary team was probably the most interesting team I ever had to manage, because I've had so many team members of so many different backgrounds. So I had time to work with a cook from Morocco, a cook from the Ivory Coast, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Chinese, the Dominican Republic, Cambodia.
Wow.
And it was just so many flavors going on. And how we were set up in the cafe was we had different stations. So one station was like the Pan Asian station. We had a station called the Ivory Coast, and we would do cooks corners where I would highlight one of my cooks so they can let people see what they do at home traditionally. So as I was very interested in the Cambodians and how they use a lot of citrus in their food. And I would ask them, like, why do you use this and how do you use that? What's the application? And I noticed that, if you look at gastronomy and how we use acid in our foods, it was the same reason why they did. It helps cut the fat. If it's a fatty piece of meat or a fatty piece of food, it helps cut the grease or the fat of it, and it gives it a pungent little taste, right? Because if you look at the Asian cuisine, they do a lot of sweet and sour.
You're right.
They do a lot of sweet and sour. So, they would tell me, like, this is why we use this. And then I would say, well, I know my grandmother, she would use vinegar a lot in a lot of her dishes when it came to like marinating beef or tougher cuts of beef, right? Because
Okay.
we couldn't afford the filet mignons or the really nice piece of meat. So we had to somehow get what we can get our hands on and break it down. And so that's what she would use the vinegar for. And I just was like, wow, there's a lot of similarities in the cultures. Moroccan cuisine, they actually use a lot of cilantro, which was surprising to me. But when I had ate a kofta, he made like a chicken kofta for me. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
man, I taste cilantro. He was like, yeah, we use cilantro a lot in our meats because a lot of their meats, they're kind of like, let's go Humphrey kill it. And so they need these flavors to kind of mask the woodiness of it, right?
Right. The
And
earthiness.
and I
Yeah.
just was like, I would have never thought that you guys would use cilantro,
Right.
So a lot of similarities, just different learning the different applications or knowing why is it that they would use that certain ingredient.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you've encountered ingredient wise or preparation wise? Or maybe, you talked about acid, cilantro, or and things like
Mhm.
that, that you've said, huh, let me try this in one of my dishes that I've known how to make, that my grandmother taught me how to make. Is that something that you've kind of felt like you want to fuse something different into a dish you've always known how to make?
So I am the queen of fusing things together. I am my team is like, chef, what are you making now? Because I'm always trying to mesh flavors together just to see if they work. I'm really big, like I said, I'm really prideful in my history and my culture. And so I try to take my traditional Puerto Rican, cuisine and mesh it with others. So for example, I love Italian food. I love pasta. I love sauces. That's kind of my niche.
Hmm.
I love to make sauces. And so I decided. So if you look at a ravioli is traditionally stuffed with ricotta cheese for the most part, right?
Hmm.
Maybe some Parmesan cheese. You have your ravioli. I decided to take some plátano, some sweet plantain.
Hmm.
I took some goat cheese because goat cheese is something we do a lot in Puerto Rico, the cabra, right?
Hmm.
And I whipped it, and I threw some Italian herbs in there, some basil. I threw some oregano in there, and then I cooked the plátano, and I made a filling with the sweet plantain and the goat cheese, and I filled the ravioli with that.
Yum.
Baby, when I tell you that thing was yummy, they didn't know what hit them. It kind of reminded you of, I don't know if you ever had like a butternut squash ravioli,
Hmm.
but it kind of, right? Because platano, the sweet
The
plantain is
sweetness.
the
Yeah.
sweetness. So it kind of reminds you of that. But everybody was like, oh my gosh, we never had a plantain. I'm like, come for me. I'm ready. I'm ready. But it was delicious, and it was just a different way to apply the plantain, and that's what I mean when I talking about, transforming our traditional things that we do and seeing how we can transform them, thinking out of the box. Or I mean, this day and age, you have TikTok and Facebook and all these other things where everybody's doing something on there,
Hmm.
right? So how can we take what we know how to do best and just make it a little interesting or make it fun or make it creative? And so yeah, so now at home or here, even here at work, I make sweet plantain goat cheese raviolis, and I do like this little nice brown butter sauce light, because you have the richness of the plátano, and we go to town. It's really good.
Oh man, that sounds delicious.
Yes.
I bet that's a big hit in the fall too.
It is, and that's exactly when I make it is in the fall because, like I
Yeah.
said, it's like in the it tastes like that sweetness of the butternut squash, and I love doing different types of egg rolls. I love also egg rolls. I love egg rolls. I love Chinese food, so I'm always doing the penne, the roast pork, when I was stuffed in an egg roll, and I'll use that's my greens. I'll use I love Caribbean. So I'll do kalaloo in there, with the roast porks, and I'll jerk it up a little bit, because anything could be stuffed in the egg roll wrap. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I I try to I try to infuse those flavors in every type of cuisine I do. So yeah, that's the fun part of my job.
Yeah, that sounds like the fun part. And I guess the second best fun part is getting to eat it. So,
Yes, ma'am.
so how did you get to this point? Like, tell us about what your decision was like deciding to get into the culinary world and like when did you know that you wanted to do this professionally and when did you decide that this was going to be your journey, your path?
So here we go. As a child, as soon as I could reach the stove, my mother and grandmother were like, "You're gonna learn how to cook, and the first thing you're gonna learn how to cook is rice and beans, right?" So ever since I could reach the stove, those were the lessons. And as a child, you're like, "Well, why are you gonna do this?" Like you're making me do this. But as I got older, I saw how no matter what we were doing throughout the day, no matter what cousin or uncle or auntie had on the schedule for today, when it was time for us to come and cook together as a family and then sit down and eat together as a family, those were the most memorable times of my life because we shared stories. We
Mm,
talked about each other's day. We talked about what's going to happen tomorrow, and feelings and emotions. And sometimes that would be the only time where we would get together and do those things. And so growing up, I said, and I saw the emotions and the smiles and the happiness when we were all eating, like, man, this is some good stuff. And you put your foot in that today. And how did you make this? And so I wanted to share this with the world. Like I wanted to let people know that, when you eat together as a unit, right? It doesn't have to be a family, it could be friends, it could be co-workers. But when you eat together, it just brings out the better part of a person, I think,
mm,
because with food comes conversation, and you
yes,
never know what conversation that might bring, right? Sometimes it brings sad, sometimes it brings happy, but sometimes it brings out conversations, and that's what we need, I think, going forward. And so that's what made me want to go and be a professional chef, not only to just infuse me into the world a little bit, but to kind of teach others that when you cook with passion, cook with love, because people actually can tell, if you did this from your heart or not,
of
right?
course. Yep.
So that's my goal. That's my ultimate goal, and that's why I got into cooking, because I saw the joy that we all got as a family,
Yeah.
when we did sit down together and eat as a unit. Yeah.
Yeah. What was language like around those tables when you were sitting together? And I know you have I know you have the Spanish and I know you have the Taino also. Like
Mhm.
are there words that you're being used that are coming from this indigenous language? Are there words that you notice were maybe very strictly Bronx Puerto Rican words or words that were very like, oh, they don't say that here. They only say that back home. Like tell us a bit about what that soundscape was.
The dinner table was really interesting because not only am I of Spanish descent, but so my father is Nigerian, okay,
Okay.
and my mother's father is Jewish,
Okay.
and then my mom's mom is the one straight from Puerto Rico.
Hmm.
So languages or traditions in the household were definitely different. I can remember a time where we were doing shredded, pork on a potato laka. You know what I mean? So because
Oh.
my mother wanted to make sure that I understood every little piece of the family, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, so I was eating like potato latkes with like pernil, roasted pernil on top. I was also learning about Kwanzaa, but also playing with a dreidel in the middle of the floor, eating my chocolate covered the gold coins, right?
Right.
This in chocolate. So I was a little confused as a child. In Puerto Rico, we don't traditionally celebrate Christmas on the 25th of December. We celebrate Los Tres Reyes, which is in January.
Right.
So when all the kids will come back from school, they'll talk about like all the gifts they were able to open up on the 25th, right? And I'm there pouting because I'm like, whatever, I can't open mine until January, right? But it's the traditions that I was able to understand as I got older, but learning about the Jewish side and the West African side of my family allowed me to be creative in this space. To say necessarily you don't have to be. I mean, my grandmother was probably the most traditional one in the family, especially when it came to the Taino part, and she would try to like really break it down to us. And, as kids, we're like, yeah, whatever. We're from the Bronx and this is how we talk, and she would say, oh, that's not tradition. So it was a little challenge, especially at the dinner table, because she wanted to still keep that tradition alive,
Mhm.
right? And in the 70s, growing up in the 70s in the Bronx, that was kind of tough when she's solely the one trying to like enforce it.
Mhm.
My mother at the time, she was a English teacher. She was an English teacher. So of course she wanted to make sure our English was really, really, put down. So the Spanish. So my grandmother's over here talking to us in Spanish, and my mom is like, "No, you need to learn proper English." So it was rough times in the Strong household. It was fun nevertheless.
But that's great. That's great that you had so many diverse touch points also, because that is something that, it helps you grow, and it helps you really understand how much of the world there is out there from such a young age. And I don't think a lot of kids really, get that experience, especially from, our part of the woods. I think it's
Absolutely.
it's important that you had that.
Yes, yes. I love it now. But as a kid, I was like,
During your career, you've been in different kitchens. You've worked with different people from different backgrounds. What does it sound like in the kitchen when you have people who are from, for example, all of the places that you named? I remember you said Ivory Coast and Cambodia
Mhm.
and Morocco. We've got a lot of linguistic diversity in the kitchen. What does that sound like? What is communication like in the kitchen?
A hot mess. So I had a large Cambodian crew at my last place, and I really struggled trying to find a way to communicate with them, right? Because I wanted them to understand me, and vice versa. And so I forcefully forced myself to say, hey, I wanted them to learn the basics, like just salt, pepper, instead of just me pointing, because I can easily point, right?
Hmm.
But I wanted them to feel comfortable enough to come to me as the chef if they ever needed anything. And so I, just went on Google Translate and did some research and
Hmm.
said, you know what, I'm going to show them or teach them basic kitchen language, right? So salt, pepper, garlic, onions, things like that. It was amazing. Once I started doing that, I think they felt just so much better about what they were doing.
Okay.
A little bit more confident. I felt confident for sure, but I think they felt comfortable now in cooking because they were cooking their own traditional items, but they would come to me with a spoon, right? And for me to taste, but they would kind of like just shove it in my mouth because they didn't know how to say, Chef, can you taste this for me? And so if it needed more salt or more acid, I wanted to be able to speak to that, to them in their own native language. And so, it can be very challenging and sometimes frustrating when you're trying to get something across and they don't understand. But I've learned over my career that, you know what, the kitchen, especially the kitchen, is made up of many different languages and many different cultures. So how can we work together as a team so we can both feel comfortable in that space, right?
Right.
Because I try to create a space that's fun, inviting, welcoming, even though we might be from all different nationalities,
Yeah.
And so yeah, I remember I was in Miami, working in Miami, and there's a lot of Haitians in Miami.
Hmm.
And so my kitchen had a lot of Haitians, and they speak the Creole language, and a lot of it is French. And I was like, you guys gotta teach me, like, teach me some words. I want to know some words. And so they started teaching me some words. And the first thing I always ask someone that has a different language is, teach me how to say like either good morning or how are you, or how to say goodbye. Because I at least want to be able to tell someone that. Even
Right.
if I don't say anything else throughout the day, at least, good morning and have a good night. And so they taught me this one phrase, ça passe, right? And then the reply is navule. And so now I'm like, that's all I say, ça passe, navule. And it's like, chef, easy, calm down. You don't have to say it all the time. But I'm like, yeah, I learned a new word.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
exciting.
and so here at my current position, I do have about three Haitians that work here. Their language is they're working on their English, and I'm helping them with their English. But I just one day just came out of the blue and said, Sapa say, and they were like, oh my God, you're Haitian. And I'm like, nah. I'm like, nope, that's the only thing I know. But you should have seen the excitement on their face. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I can tell that at that point when I said Sapa say, and it was like, oh, Nabule. And then they started like running off. And I'm like, yeah, you lost me. That's all I know. But they got so excited,
Hmm.
and that's what I look for. And so now they're comfortable with me. Now they come to me and they talk to me in their language, and I'm like, we're gonna get there slowly but surely.
Yeah.
But it's a wonderful thing. It's great.
Yeah. That must be so validating for you as a head chef in establishing your team and establishing trust and getting your team to unify and be on board with and trusting your leadership too, that you're willing to take that step to understand a bit of their language, a bit of their culture. I think that speaks volumes.
Well, you know what, too, especially in the hospitality industry, I may think I'm superwoman and I can do it all, but at the end of the day, it's all them. It's my team that makes the ship run. I'm just the captain of the ship, and I'm gonna make sure it doesn't go down. And if it goes down, I'm going down with the ship. But my job is to make sure it doesn't go down. So they're the ones doing the work, and they're the ones that's steering it. So I have to make sure I put them in a comfortable space. So then that way I feel comfortable knowing that they're going to do the job, and they're going to do it with passion and with love and with caring, you
Right.
know?
Yeah. That's amazing. Is that typical in a kitchen where there is a lingua franca amongst the diverse languages that are spoken? Like, are we automatically saying, okay, we have to default to English, or is it something like it's up to the chef and like how you choose to communicate with your team? Like, and this is maybe a weird question, but I've never been in a kitchen before, so
I think it's so in New York, I did go to school my first round in New York, and I did
Mhm.
do a couple of internships down in the village. And as I was doing some internships down in the village, I noticed that a lot of the team members in the kitchens were a lot of Hispanics, for all different backgrounds, but mostly Hispanics. And so, as I started traveling, I started noticing that the kitchen team started getting a little bit more diverse, with the Cambodians, the Vietnamese, the Dominicans, and things like that. And so, you know, that question you asked me, it's tough because I think as an individual, that's my personality and how I want to deal with my team. But do we divert to English for the most part? Yes.
Okay.
I've been around a lot of chefs. I've been in a lot of kitchens. Before I started in corporate, I was in hotels. So, it's kind of, I think, the personality of the leader and how they want to pursue it. I just could honestly be like, you know what? I speak English. That's kind of my first language. So this is how we're gonna do it. Either you learn or you don't, right? I kind of take that extra step and say, well, I know it's a little tough for you. It's going to be tough for me. So how can we do it to where it's not so tough on either one of us,
Mhm.
right? Because the struggle is real, especially when you're trying to conduct business in an operation. You have to make sure it goes right. You know what I mean? So how can I ensure that whatever this individual is doing is going to be done right? And if he or she doesn't understand you and I don't understand them, that's where the disconnect can happen.
Mhm.
So I think it's an individual thing, a personality thing,
Okay.
to answer your question.
Okay. When you're encountering different dishes as a chef and throughout your career, your time with restaurant associates, and I imagine as you're going to different kitchens, you got to learn to cook different things and you have to learn to do them well, of course. What kind of considerations do you have to take in order to, I don't want to say, I guess, get close to understand
Mm-hmm.
what the elements are for cooking a different kind of cuisine than maybe one that you've grown up with or one that you're very, very well versed in?
I think the most important thing is understanding the techniques of cooking. Number one, we all, we all kind of have the same basic techniques when it comes to cooking, no matter what culture you're in. It could be braising, pan frying, searing, boiling, right? It's just, some cultures may do it for a little longer. They may expect a different color than another culture. But I think understanding the basics of cooking really helps. But then also, if you're not familiar with those spices, then researching. You know, I look at food as a big playground. Like, play with your food. I remember when we were children, our moms used to be like, don't play with your food. But I encourage my team to experiment and to play around, because that's, especially if you're not from a certain culture, how do you know what something tastes like if you
Mhm.
don't mix it together or try it, right? So I think researching, I did a lot of research before I came here, because even though I am indigenous, and if you look at the similarities, we use a lot of root vegetables, and so did the native Indians. A lot of our vegetables are different, but we definitely prepare them differently and we cook
Mhm.
them differently. So I think understanding the culture, and then if you don't know the culture very well, or the spices or the techniques they use, then really try to engulf yourself in that, or be around someone that knows that history, that you can learn from. I learned how to make, like, I'm a Puerto Rican, but I can make a banging curry, right? I had a
Wait,
cook from back.
which curry? The green curry? The we got a lot of
Yeah,
curries.
you're right. So he was from Bangladesh.
Okay.
He was from Bangladesh, and he would make this unbelievable fresh naan bread
Mm.
that was amazing. And I was like, you got to teach me how to do that. Like, I need to know how to do that, right? And he also taught me how to make the red curry, and like made it in different various spice levels. And one of the techniques that he taught me was, in India, they heat up their spices before they
Mm.
use them.
Right.
And and then they grind a lot of their spices. So they'll buy their spices whole and grind them up and then toast them off, which releases a lot of the aromatics. And I'm like, huh, that's the trick. And that was the trick, right? So it's just learning little nuances like that in other cultures that kind of helps you, even though you're not from there, you can be like, you know what, I made that. And you would
Mhm.
have never thought I made that. But it's
Right.
because, I spent time, educating myself so I can be as authentic as possible, because, you'll have someone call you out if it's not right.
Right?
You know what I'm
Especially
saying?
nowadays. Yeah.
Yes, you will have that call out. So I think that's very important. If you're gonna be in this industry, or you're gonna do this and do it with passion, then understand what it is that you're doing. And it's okay to say, you know what, I'm really not comfortable with that.
Mhm.
Right? Like, don't jump in head first. If you're not sure, just go ahead and do some more research, and play around with your food a little bit more.
Yeah. I like that answer. We should play with our food and play with
Yes.
flavors. You know
Yeah.
what's funny is that I love sandwiches, right? And when I talk about sandwiches, sometimes I'll be sitting and I'm like, I really want a sandwich that has, and then I'll just start naming the ingredients, right? Because I'm like layering it in my head. I'm picturing it in my head, right? And then whoever I'm explaining this to actually will say, that doesn't even make sense. Like, why would you do that? Why would you put that together? And it's like, I just want to try it. It just sounds like
Sounds
it would make sense. And I think that's the only way to really find out if you like
it,
something or you don't.
the
Um,
only way.
yeah,
Because
because
sometimes in our head, we'll see it and like, man, that sounds really good. But then when you actually put the flavors together, if you don't really know the flavors, it might be like, ooh, nah, that's not right.
mhm,
So that's the only way you're gonna know is if you play with your food.
totally. I made this sandwich once. I'm gonna talk about food, and I fully recognize I'm not a professional like you. I'm just enthusiastic. But like Thanksgiving, I would take my leftovers, like I would take the turkey and the ham, and then I would put it on a sandwich, right? Because, like I said, I love sandwiches. But then I started putting raspberry jam on the bread. And then underneath, I had one year, someone gave me a jar of onion relish, and I would put that on the other side of the bread. And sometimes I put a little cheese on there. And I remember my mom was like, what the hell are
Are
you
you
doing?
doing?
And then I can never, well, I don't have the relish anymore, but it's so good to me. It's so good. And I can never get anyone else to try it. But
Well, you kind of made your own version of like a cooked monsieur. You had the sweet with the saltiness of the ham, right? And when you do cooked monsieur, you batter it, you make the sandwich, you batter it, you fry it, and then you put like powdered sugar on it. So that was like, Ellie's own version of a cooked monsieur. So hey, you fancy.
feel so validated now. My little leftover Coke. You're working around different people, and you mentioned that the technical knowledge that you have in the kitchen is the same, and people should be on the same level with their ability in the kitchen. And as you're working with different people from different parts of the world, is there a technique or a preparation that you've witnessed from a team member at any point in your career that surprised you and made you say, oh, I never thought to do that, or what's that about?
So I had a cook, and this was about maybe 15 years ago that I saw her. So traditionally, if you peel like a melon or a cantaloupe, you peel it going around the edges like that, right?
Hmm.
One day I saw her, and she was Vietnamese. She was Vietnamese. And she was peeling a pineapple in a way that I've never seen before. And it was so intriguing to me. And so I said, well, why do you peel the pineapple that way? We traditionally we peel it from the top to the bottom, going along the sides.
Hmm.
She peeled it. She would cut the pineapple in half with the skin still on, the eyes still on there, cut it in half, and then she would take the knife and go from the side, right?
Huh.
So yeah, it was mind blowing. And so I said, "You got to like, why do you do that?" And so she said, the spots on the pineapple, they call those the eyes.
Right.
And so, she was like, "Oh, when you do it this way, it ensures that you take the eyes out like in one swoop, and you don't have to like dig kind of individually to take the eyes out." I was like, "That is dope." Like, I'm taking that. And so I've been doing it like that ever since. And so it's funny because my sous chef a little whiles back saw me peeling the pineapple, and she was like, "I've never seen that before." And I was like, "Baby, 15 years ago, I never seen it either." And I was like, "Yeah, I peel it this way because, I saw this young lady do it and she told me why. And now every time I do it, the eyes come right out. I don't have to like go back in and dig with a smaller knife to take the eyes out." And so that technique right there just blew my mind, right? Because I just thought traditionally that's how you do it. You can't do it no other way. But as I in these other teams or with these other cultures, you see so much,
Yeah.
so many different techniques, so many different things that they may do, little nuances that improves the dish.
Mhm.
So those are the little things I enjoy, is picking up little things here and there.
Yeah. When you are cooking and creating indigenous dishes, even of your own heritage, or as of your where you work now, what considerations do you feel that you've had to make or that one has to make when diving into creating these dishes, and anything that may be technical or as well as spiritual or reverential or historical or anything of that nature?
So one thing I've had to understand here in this particular museum is, to try to be as traditional as possible. If you look at the history and the culture of the Native American, their crops or their ingredients that they had weren't of many, right? It was mostly gourds, squash, potatoes, corn. It's like, how do we take those ingredients that were for them what they had to use and make it taste good, make it have taste, and but don't take so, don't put so much that it takes away from the traditional dish. We make something called an Indian corn pudding, where it's made from cornmeal. It has some milk in there, it has some spices in there, and we use molasses to give it that color.
Hmm.
And so in my head, I'm like, oh man, that's like, I'm gonna make this like like a pudding. Like I'm gonna do this Southern style, right? I'm gonna flip it. But I have to sometimes stop myself and think, because we have a lot of like traditional Native Americans that come to visit this museum. And so I have to be careful about how I do things. We also do the fry bread here, which is just three ingredients. And they really look at like the pillowiness of the fried bread, and if it's too dense, they're like, yeah, no, that's not it, and it's just three simple ingredients.
I just want to interject and say that fry bread is delicious. It's amazing.
And dangerous.
I inhaled it, and I think about it on a
Yes.
weekly basis, and I need to come back and try it again.
So real quick, you're into sandwiches. What you can do is take fried piece of fried bread, cut that thing in half the long way, and use that as your bun and make you a sandwich. I'm just saying, since you went to sandwiches and all.
All right, I'm writing that down
Just,
because
I'm telling you, you might hurt yourself with that one.
fry bread sandwich. Love it.
So staying traditional is definitely something that I try to maintain here. But as you look around in the cafe, we have a space that we've created called Chef's Table, and which allows me to now be my creative self and kind of think out the box and do things that are non-traditional, or even showcase some of my dishes from Puerto Rico. And also too allows me to give my cooks their little limelight. I'll say I have one of my head lead cooks is from Mexico, and so I want him to create for Hispanic Heritage Month. We're going to run a special little promo, and I want him to make his traditional Mexican dishes, right? Because they're also indigenous as well. I have someone from Peru here. Hey, I want you to do one of your street foods that you're known for in Peru. Let's showcase that, and let's tell people the history of that. So the space in my cafe is good because we have to keep our traditional Native American foods, but this space here allows me to be creative and let my team also be creative as well.
That's wonderful. There's so much indigenous culture from the north Canada all the way to the south of Argentina. So, I love that you're getting to showcase that, and especially through food and giving people an opportunity to tell those stories as well.
And to try something different, right? A lot of people that you come through the cafe, I speak to a lot of people. I had this one couple. It was like, man, we drove all the way from Athens, Georgia, just to taste the wild rice salad. And I'm thinking to myself, baby, this better be the best wild rice salad you ever had in your life, driving from Athens, Georgia, right? But there's a lot of people that come who are not familiar with the food. I had one couple, when they heard Indian food, they thought of the curries and the spicy, and
Mm.
I had to explain to them, no, this is more, Midwest Native American. And so I walked them through the station, and they was like, oh, okay. And I was like, well, if you don't know nothing else, go over there and get that fried bread. You'll love it. Because we do the fried bread taco over there, and that's one of our most popular stations.
Yeah.
Um, so, just knowing what it is that you're cooking. And one of the things I explained to the team, my line servers is, know what it is that you're serving because you're going to get questions. I try to educate them every day a little bit on the food that they're serving. So if they get those questions, they can answer them, on a simple level, and then they'll come and get me if there's still some type of issue. But for the most part, it's about education.
Okay. You mentioned some of the ingredients that we have in indigenous cooking, like the corn, maize, and the gourds and things like that. Where are we seeing spices, and what kind of spices are we using? And then also, what is typical preparation like for some of these foods?
Typically, we share a lot of the root vegetables and the squashes. When it comes to spices, I see a pretty big difference, especially from the Latin culture to the Native Americans. They use a lot of the berries, like they use a lot of juniper berry, which is actually a really strong flavor if you don't know juniper berry, but they use a lot of the juniper berries, and they use a lot of I'm learning they use something called choke cherry, which is a variation of a cherry, which is so hard to get, like unless you buy it on Amazon. Like nobody sells it out here.
Huh.
So and that's when I talk about tradition. I try to be as tradition as possible, but living in the DMV, you're not going to find choke cherry in the store,
Mm.
not even in the international market unless you order it online. So it's like now as a chef, how do I try to create this choke cherry without it being way out of the box, using like a regular cherry that somebody might call me out on. I don't know, right? So
Hmm.
that's kind of what I have to do on a day-to-day basis if we can't get the ingredients. But we work with like our wild rice, we get it from a whole nother source because we're trying to use the ingredients that they would use, or maybe a wild rice that's grown in the Midwest as opposed to a wild rice that's grown here. Because remember, the land is different, the
Right.
water is different, right? The
Right.
atmosphere is different. So they may look the same, but they're going to taste different.
Hmm.
So we try to do things like that as much as possible. But I know with the Latin culture, we've gotten away from using a lot of the fresh ingredients, and a lot of it is just these dried spices that have been sitting on somebody's shelf for like who knows how long. And of
Hmm.
course, they got to add preserves into it, right? So it doesn't spoil. So what are we really putting into our bodies? And so, like, I cringe at the fact that they sell sofrito in the supermarket already done, when to me it's just so easy to make. You know what I mean? And so I make it and I freeze it, and I'm like, I'm not buying that. And plus, grandma would probably toss in her grave if she knew I was buying it. So I'm still scared of grandma. I don't play with her. So it's things like that I try to instill in using fresh herbs and fresh vegetables, trying to stay away from the stuff that kind of sits in the shelves. But sometimes you can't help it because you can't get those things in the area that we're in.
Hmm.
Like I have the hardest time finding culantro here unless I go like myself to the international market. Where in New York, you go to the corner store and it's right there,
Right.
right?
Right.
Here, I have to drive like 20 miles to go get some culantro. And for us, culantro is our main ingredient when we make sofrito.
Right.
It's really not sofrito if you don't use culantro.
Yeah.
When it comes to the Native American, I try to use all of their spices that they would typically use. We do use a lot of like New Mexican spices because we do a lot of like we do a bison chili that we use a New Mexican spice in or chili in. So I'll buy like the guajillo peppers, the ancho chili peppers. I'll buy those fresh and we dry them out to try to just keep those bold flavors that you would
Hmm.
taste, you know what I mean, traditionally.
Yeah. That's such a responsibility to be representing, authenticity with your dishes. And it's so refreshing to hear that you take such care with it.
Well, and I know me as a consumer, like when I go out and I read something on the menu, I kind of expect it to taste that way, right? And
Mhm.
so as a chef, of course, I'm already picky, right? Nobody likes to take me anywhere because I break it all down. But as a paying customer, I want that same feeling. And so I try to look at it from their perspective as well. That whatever I put in my mouth, I want it to really taste good or taste traditional. If I'm going to buy a alcapurria, I know what an alcapurria tastes like. Don't try to fool me because I'm gonna get you, right. And if
Mhm.
you say this is authentic and it's traditional, then I should be able to taste that when I eat it. So I try to think of it on both aspects.
Mhm. Now, what was that word that you just said?
Alcapurria.
What's that?
So it's our version of a meat patty. So the Jamaicans have their meat patty. We
Yeah.
have our meat patty, and you make the base out of yuca, green plantain, calabaza, and you grind everything up, and that's your shell. And then you stuff it with ground beef. Traditionally, you stuff it with like a picadillo, which is
Mhm.
ground beef, raisins, olives.
Mhm.
We love raisins and olives and everything we do. um, and then you kind of pan fry it, and it is the most delicious thing you ever put in your mouth.
Man, where have I been? Why have I never had that
You
before?
gotta go to a cuchifrito store and get your alcapurria.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'm gonna do that. Do you want to talk about your time with Restaurant Associates?
Yes. So
Okay.
I've been with Restaurant Associates 20 years now. I started with them at Wolfgang Puck at the Georgia Aquarium in Atlanta. I started out as an hourly cook, and I learned a lot of things. I mean, being under the director of Wolfgang Puck and their food, I definitely learned a lot, a
Mhm.
lot, a lot. So, as I was an hourly cook with them, about 3 years, me being at the aquarium, I got an opportunity to get a promotion, become a junior sous chef. But it was going to be in Miami, Florida. And I was a little nervous because I'm like, hey, I'm just an hourly cook and I don't know nothing about being no junior sous chef and I'm going to a whole nother state.
Mhm.
But it was my way to kind of get my feet wet and start learning the leadership role and the management role as a junior sous chef. So, Restaurant Associates has definitely allowed me to grow and given me opportunities to shine and to really become my true self. I think that I love food and I have a passion for it, right? But my love first and foremost is people, because
Mhm.
I think without people you really can't have food.
Mhm.
And that's how I look at it, because people are the ones, if you look at the history, we're the ones that kind of gathered the food. We're
Right.
the ones that did had to sacrifice for food. So it's us that I really, really indulge in to ensure that, hey, if we are going to work with food, let's work with it with love and care. So RA has definitely allowed me to come into myself on that aspect and to really, really know what it is that I want to take my leadership how I want to take it to the next level
Mhm.
when it comes to this thing. It's not all about, listen, I carry my little tweezers in my back pocket and, food this, food that. But I'm all about just cooking real food and making it taste good. And so when you eat it, you think of your grandma, or you think about your mom, or you think about, man, I remember back in the day when me and cousin so and so used to eat this on the block. That's what I'm about. Is
Mhm.
is is when you consume, you start getting these warm, fuzzy feelings, and how much joy it brought you. I definitely have to applaud RA as a company for allowing me to kind of spread my wings and kind of see where I'm at.
That's wonderful. That's such a great story of growth. And I want to say thank you to Restaurant Associates for introducing us and for facilitating this conversation between us as well. This has been fun and I can talk to you about food for the rest of
Yes.
the day.
Yes.
I really, really could. But I want people to know who are listening to this, especially that this is why I want to have this conversation about food and language, because I see them as, as you said, you want people to eat what you cook and to be reminded of their, the good times and the special memories and things like that, just like we We always remember what our grandmother taught us. We always remember what our moms taught us and our fathers, our siblings, and you know, the things that are transmitted with language are also, I think, transmitted to us with food, and we transmit them to others through language and food. So thank you for joining me in this conversation and putting these connections together and just having fun talking about your work and what you love.
I appreciate you for even bringing these conversations to light because I think that a lot of people, when they think of food, they just think of food, right? That yes, we need it for the nourishment of our bodies, but it's so much more than that.
Mhm.
It's history, it's pain,
Right.
it's joy. So, just allowing me to express that through our conversation means a lot. So thank you for bringing that to light. And if anybody's in the DMV area, come see me, Chef Alex. I'm doing a little shameless plug here.
No,
Come
don't
see
be
me.
shameless. Plug away. This is
Come
your
see me
chance.
at the Mitsitam Café. And just a fun fact, Mitsitam means let's eat in the language of the Delaware and the Piscataway people. So that's a cute little fun fact there,
I
So
love that.
Mitzakam, let's eat. But what I want the listeners to walk away with at the end of the day is, you know, enjoy your food, right? And play with your food. At the end of the day, it's about what you give into this food and how you can manipulate that food into something that tastes really, really good.
Mhm.
You know, I can look at three things in my cupboard and make a whole meal out of it, right? But there's some people that may not know those ingredients. So how do we show them how to manipulate that so they can have a healthy meal,
Mhm.
right? With what they have in their cupboard. So, just take that, have fun, enjoy, know your history, and just eat. Eat your heart out. That's all you got to do.
Love that. I love that so much. I'm gonna add a link to Mitsitam Cafe in the show notes for this episode so that people who are listening and they are ready to come down to the DMV area, they'll be able to find you. You're amazing. And this has been such an amazing conversation. So I want to ask you my last question, and I ask this in every episode. And we've been having fun. So, you know, let's just keep the good times rolling. But do you have any jokes, popular sayings, tongue twisters, cool slang words, idioms, words of wisdom, or words of advice in any language that you've encountered or that you speak to share and to teach us?
Maybe some words of wisdom, especially for, chefs in this industry. As a chef, I interact with many, many walks of life. So, what's important is that you get to know your teammates, right? Get to know them on an individual basis because you'll never know their story if you don't talk to them. And I've learned so much about so many of my employees and their background and their history. It amazes me, and that's how you get to know the individuals. If you don't speak in your own language,
Mhm.
all right, which can be with words, it could be with pictures, it could be with hand gestures, it could be through food. I remember at my last place, we had a female who was hard of hearing. She worked in the kitchen. And I wanted so bad for her to know I was telling her good morning. And so I, went on an app on my phone and I'm like, I need to learn how to sign good morning so she knows that I see her, right? And she's just not another person in the kitchen.
Mhm.
And so I learned, and she was just so excited. And so now every morning she would just hug me and to say thank you. And sometimes she would need like an avocado or something. She would just write it down and she'll say, and I'll be like, okay, you need an avocado. Right. But just to know that I was able to just say good morning to her every morning in her language, right? Because
Yeah,
sign language is also a language,
of
right?
course.
So, just get to know the people around you, get to know your team because you'll never know their story and you'll never know their background and what they can bring and what they can offer to the operation. You
Right.
never know if you don't get to talk to people and understand them.
Yeah.
So that's my
Great
little
advice.
tidbit.
Great advice. Great advice. Well, Chef Alex, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for this conversation. It's been a pleasure chatting with you today. And before I let you go, just really quickly, even having a conversation, let's assume It's this conversation. You've been having a conversation for quite some time. You're enjoying yourself, but it's time to go your separate ways. Let's do this in Spanish. What is the best way to say goodbye?
We would say adios, and then we would say vete con Dios, right? To be guided, goodbye, and be guided by God on your travels, wherever it is you're going. So to you, I want to say gracias para todos, buenas noches, y vete con Dios.
I love that. Adios y vete con Dios.
Yes.
Chef Alex, thank you so much. And I'll be talking to you soon.
All right. Talk to you soon. Thank you.